The budgets of the ABC and SBS will each be cut by 1%, and the government will axe the Australia network, which the ABC operates. To discuss the cuts, ABC Managing Director Mark Scott joins me now. Mark Scott, good morning. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning.
No cuts to the ABC, said Tony Abbott, and he said that more than once. So is Tony Abbott a liar?
Well, I'm not going to get into the political debates, Virginia, but the commitment was very clear, no funding cuts to the ABC and SBS, and what we're looking at is a $120 million funding cut over the next 4 years, and the bulk of that is the axing of Australia network.
What's the motive, do you think, for the Abbott government to break its promise?
I think on Australia network there can be debate around where public diplomacy money is best spent. What we find confusing and disappointing about this is that we signed a deal with the Department of Foreign Affairs for Australia Network less than 12 months ago, and we've hit all our agreed targets. We're growing audiences, we have some tremendous partnerships with broadcasters in the region, we're a real leader on social media, so we're doing what we agreed it was important to do. And so if a decision is made to cut that, it's clearly nothing to do with performance. And I would have thought that for $20 million a year, it represents exceptional value for money to reach out and connect with our neighbours in the region. It's a real person-to-person diplomatic initiative rather than being on the diplomatic cocktail circuit. So I'm very surprised that they don't think that that's value for money.
This is the quote from the Foreign Affairs Minister Julie Bishop. The Australia network has failed to deliver a cost-effective vehicle for advancing Australia's broad and enduring interests in the Indo-Pacific. So you say that she's wrong?
Well, with great respect to the Minister, we are reaching all our agreed targets with DFAT. We're growing our audiences, we're growing our partnerships. Broadcasters in the region want to work with us and want to show Australian content. This very month, we are showing a swag of Australian content on the single biggest television network in Indonesia that reaches 100 million people. I think it represents exceptional value for money, and I'm very sorry the Minister didn't want to engage in detailed consultation with the ABC around this service. I think a decision was clearly made quite a long time ago. There hasn't been extensive consultation around it. A decision was made to axe this service, and we have to live with that now.
What sort of consultation has there been?
Well, we have been talking with the Minister's staff. There was a very brief meeting with the Minister. I had one meeting with the department head on it, but I don't think that there was a serious, detailed way of working and thinking through how this service in fact could be recut if that's what they wanted it to do.
The government's been openly critical of aspects of the ABC, and News Limited, of course, has led a sustained attack on the public broadcaster. An attack, of course, that's in their own financial interests, and of course News Limited wanted this contract for Australia Network as well. So are these cuts and is this decision, is this the payoff now for News Limited?
Well, in the legislation for the ABC, no one else can operate this international broadcasting service apart from the ABC. So if the government wanted to give it to Sky, they'd have to legislate to bring about that change. But I think it's just a very disappointing decision. In the ABC's charter, we're meant to be an international broadcaster. We have responsibility to do that. Our budget to deliver that service has now been more than halved, and we're going to have to think very carefully about how we perform as an international broadcaster now.
Time is short, and I want to ask you about job cuts in a moment, but could the ABC go it alone? Could you put together some sort of operation you could broadcast into the region, particularly given the agreement we've struck with China? And could you continue doing this anyway?
We need to review all our alternatives now. We deliver a radio service without direct funding. We could do that on television, but the money has been axed and we'd need to work out how on earth we'd fund that, and that's hard to see at this point.
Sending News 24 just straight over the satellite wouldn't do it?
We'd need to be able to get the rights for that. That's quite expensive, but one option is to increase the amount of News 24 content that you're putting up into the region.
How many jobs go from Australia Network?
Hard to say at this point. That depends on what we decide the shape of our international service would be. You would think there could be dozens of job cuts on the back of a funding cut of this size, but that's the work that the management team and the board need to do now in coming weeks.
Well, it's been reported that the ABC has conducted an extensive internal review already in preparation for these cuts, so presumably you do know what direction you could go in. Well, where is the fat in the ABC?
Well, it depends a bit. The government has commissioned an efficiency review, and they are saying that the funding cuts that came last night are simply a down payment on further cuts to go. I think this is an ominous thing for ABC audiences. Where we have found efficiencies in the past, we have reinvested them in new services for audiences. So iView, News 24, News Breakfast, all our online activity has all been funded by efficiencies the ABC has found. Now, if the government's going to take further efficiencies we can find and scoop all that money up and take that away from the ABC, then and the ABC becomes a smaller organisation and a less relevant and compelling organisation. So that's a debate, that's a conversation we need to have with government in coming months.
Just looking at this 1% cut though, how many job losses does that represent?
We don't know at this point. We need to look at that. The figure was really only confirmed to us last night. So an immediate
do you have a rough idea?
No, we don't want to comment on that at the moment. We need to look at where we will find the savings for the 1%. But the more ominous thing, I think, for ABC audiences is if the government has in mind further substantive funding cuts to the ABC on top of the $120 million that was cut out through the budget last night.
But that means program cuts as well?
Well, I think invariably, if in fact the ABC's budget is cut, then we need to cut jobs and cut back on services. We will look to try and find efficiencies as we can, and our priority will be to save money from support services as we can. But you can't absorb big funding cuts without cutting back services, without cutting back staff, and without cutting back on all those new initiatives that we've launched and continuing to do that, because that's what's really engaged the public with the ABC of the digital era.
If it becomes a smaller, shrunken and more reduced organisation, as you've indicated that you fear, that's pretty much what critics such as News Limited have been after.
Yeah, but it's not what the Australian public wants. We are by far the most trusted and respected media organisation in the country. Nearly 9 in 10 Australians believe that with our funding now, we represent valuable service. And 3/4 of Australians are watching or listening or logging in every week. The Australian public like the ABC. They're our strongest supporters, and I don't think they want our budget cut any further.
Well, what does all of this do to your position as Managing Director?
Well, I continue to engage with the government and I continue to lead the organisation. I've led us through a period of significant growth. Now we need to look at where our priorities are and where we need to focus to complete this transformation of the ABC as a digital broadcaster.
But it doesn't seem this government wants to see the ABC transforms. It wants to see the ABC cut back.
Well, I just think that there are numbers of people in the government who I speak to are strong supporters of the ABC. They have a budgetary environment that they are trying to deal with. We need to continue to assert our case, how as part of the Australian media landscape, the ABC is a compelling centre point of that. That's what the public want and that's what they expect the government to deliver. And that was central to the Prime Minister's promise in the lead up to the last election.
Does this speak to your lack of power of persuasion with this government?
No, I think I have a pretty good relationship with the government. There are some who suggest that some in the government would seek to cut more. No, we'll continue to engage. We'll continue to just make the case of the compelling role of the ABC in the media landscape and the great support the public has of the ABC.
Mark Scott, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia.